And we'll leave you with a bigger picture conversation on the role of women in politics, what seems, at least in 2018, to be a distinct moment of change. Joining me is a woman who has dedicated years to that cause. Ambassador Swanee Hunt served as U.S. Ambassador to Austria in the 90s before founding the Women in Public Policy program at Harvard and the Washington-based nonprofit Inclusive Security. Ambassador Hunt, pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So let's just start with the U.S. because it's sort of the most obvious and most recent, what is being described as a sort of tide of change. Women sort of in record-setting wins in all the races, in governor's races, Senate, first Native American woman, first Muslim woman. How, as somebody who has dealt with this issue around the world for so many years, how do you reflect on what's happening in the U.S. now? Well,
it was really a shock in terms of what happened in the Democratic Party, but we have to separate that because it was
two different stories,
very different. And it was Hillary's loss, but when Hillary lost, she said she'd put out this call for women to run, and then the Kavanaugh hearings, at the end. But then in between, the Women's March, 4 million, mostly women, and organized by women. And the Me Too movement, very significant. We elected a misogynist who talked about grabbing women between their legs and called one of them a horse face. I mean, the whole, I could go on and on. So women were furious, they were outraged, and they had a good time as well, running in record numbers, and then organizing each other's campaigns and going door to door. I mean, they did the whole thing, soup to nuts, as we would say.
Are you ever concerned when you hear about sort of the waves like the Me Too movement, about the distinction between something that feels to be maybe a trend or sort of hyped up a little bit and between real change? Do you feel like what we're seeing now is the beginning of long-term real change?
No question. It's a seismic shift. It's unstoppable. But, the Republican Party, here's our problem, because we have gridlock, right? And my hope is, long-term, that we will break gridlock by having women working with women, because we know they do disproportionately to men in terms of co-sponsoring bills. The difficulty is the Republicans are 90% white men. God bless them. I mean, and they went down from 8% women to 7%, while the Dems are all the way up to 40% women, and half of them are women of color. So it's so imbalanced and becoming more and more imbalanced. But I think the Republicans are going to get the message, and they're going to have to start running women.
Well, I want to talk about a little bit more of what you do in terms of, it's not just women in politics or women in security, it's really women in conflict. And as part of inclusive security, a lot of what you talk about is also hearing from some remarkable women on the changes that they have made in specific conflict zones. So before we get into that, I just want to show a little bit of a taste of some of that. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani, for example, he's speaking here about how women's leadership styles are a little bit different. Watch.
Women bring very different styles of leadership if they're allowed to develop their own distinctive style than men. And that the model of leadership that we've inherited through the masculinity of the state needs to be questioned. This model is not flexible enough, it's not creative enough. So management-wise, we need a fundamental rethinking, not just in terms of positioning, as you've been arguing, and I agree with you, consciously looking to allow women to rise, but also in terms of the change of styles, so that they don't then become honorary men.
What have you sort of seen in all your work with women and men across different sort of, not only countries, but different levels of the hierarchy? What do you think the real difference is in women leadership?
Well, women have tremendous advantages if they can be at the table. We know that peace agreements last much longer if you have women involved. Constitutions last longer if you have women involved. But the key is that women are less threatening than men. So during and after a conflict, they can go places where a man would get shot for going. They're very used to working across the aisles. They're really good listeners. And they bring this passion for stopping the war because it's their families. And so it goes on and on and on. I was talking to a general after we bombed the hell out of Baghdad, and I went on for an hour with him about why you've got to bring in the women right now, because they're going to help you achieve your objectives for all those reasons. And you know what he said to me at the end? He said, Ambassador Hunt, thank you so much for coming, and I want to assure you that once we get the place secure, we're going to think about women's issues. And I thought, wait, this is not cervical cancer. You know, this is security we're talking about.
Well, that's one of the fundamental, really, distinctions, it sounds like, is that a women's issue, women in leadership is considered a women's issue rather than just an issue. period.
Well, and also we start out with this idea of women as victims. Like, oh, those poor women, we got to help them out. Once you start there, with a tug to your heart, you can't get to your head, which is, oh, these women have got to, they're less corrupt, they've got to be heading up the agencies afterwards, and let's figure out if they're at the negotiating table in meaningful numbers, we're going to be able to prevent a war or stop a war.
Well, I want to see on that note a little bit more, another clip of a really remarkable woman who certainly doesn't seem to paint herself as a victim. This is Ruth Caesar. She's a founding member of a women's peace network in Liberia. Here's a clip.
We got the women of Sierra Leone and Guinea for us to meet and sort out our differences so we can join together and seek peace for that sub-region. And the refugee crisis in Guinea was so much, and Guinea too had entered a conflict somehow. Yes, so the Liberian women thought to extend an olive branch to the women of Guinea and Sierra Leone for us to get together to see how we can together put our voices together and our action to build peace.
That feels like something familiar on a pretty incredible scale, which is a sort of ability to say, hey, we're all people, we need to sit down, we need to actually talk, we need to have a conversation.
We are all people. That's definitely a huge part of it. But don't underestimate the fact that they also are saying we're all women. And we have certain things in common, and they will constantly be relating to each other, woman to woman. The effect is all people. Everyone benefits. This isn't about how do you make women feel better or how do you advance women. You have to advance women to make this happen. But this is really about how do you get to security, and what we know is that women relate to women in a magical way, just like you and I are in this moment.
For a woman, for anyone really watching who sees the sort of notion of the need for more women in politics and security across the board,
right.
And it feels like sort of a mountain, like a very big mountain to climb. Where should they begin? Do you have any sort of advice for, the woman who might want to see herself in those positions one day?
Absolutely. A key is to ask women to run and constantly be saying, hey, I heard you on this interview, and I think you did a really good job. Have you considered running for office? By the way, have you considered running for office?
News is enough.
Yeah, right, yeah. Right. But the constant, when a woman hears that 9 times, guess what? From men and women, guess what? There's a real chance that she'll run.
Is there a problem, though, with having the opposite, with a sort of notion of competition or that a sort of zero-sum game? We hear about that a lot, about women not necessarily helping other women because of that sort of overall atmosphere. Have you found that?
No, I haven't. I mean, of course, you can find examples here and there. Yeah. But it depends. If a woman comes up into her power through a women's movement, like Hillary did, right. It's very different from if she has sharpest elbows, like Maggie Thatcher, who had 100% male pyramid that she had to get to the top of. Right. It's a very different kind of sense of self.
So 2 years later, reflecting on Hillary Clinton's loss, do you feel like that was, in fact, maybe some sort of success for women down the road?
Here's what I feel. Hillary broke a glass ceiling. Yeah, Hillary broke a glass ceiling because now we're thinking about who's going to run in 2020. People are saying, well, what about Elizabeth Warren? What about Kamala Harris? No one is even thinking, can we have a woman?
Right.
Because the people who hated Hillary, they hated her because they imagined her behind the desk in the Oval Office. Right. The people who loved her because they imagined her around in the Oval Office behind the desk. So everyone has broken the ceiling right here.
So now we're not asking if a woman, but which woman.
That's right.
That's already a big step.